In Illurin Forest, a rectank, funky ridiculous nobody, with their guild, will corpse walk and explore through dangerous caverns to depths. What lies beyond Azeroth's finest wild dungeons and settlements, to see who of them gets chicken fried the fastest or last along without their pants being on fire. This is how their story unfolds. This is An Azeroth Mortal's Boosting Adventures, Episode 6. Another fucking day and like another amount of corpses needs to be eradicated here in the canyons itself. What is gonna be this time? A bunch of Centaurians, a bunch of Abbots or something similar? No, it looks like the first kind of thing here is actually an Adept. An Adept usually stands for an amateur that is very, very sort of adaptable, but in an amateurish kind of fashion, you know. It's sort of a little bit similar when a camel basically tries to put its head in a haystack itself, and that head basically it itself gets too basically hayified, and because of being too hayified itself, then it simply it feels like it has to basically sneeze all the time it itself, and before you literally can come up with something to simply say about it in itself, then after that it gets too kind of like too sort of like coldy sort of like sneezy coldy it itself, basically hayified whole sneezy cold it itself. Yeah, it's very bad stuff for your fellow cowboys here in the western itself, and like yours your sheriff here in town has also been kind of through this sort of let's say selectable sort of occurrences sometimes itself. It's not good for any other animals here, and this Beastmaster here he definitely kind of got so into basically want the can to the face sort of fashion that he couldn't stop simply thinking that this is essentially pretty much like trying to play a handball with your wand. It's you're literally having someone else throw a bunch of hay balls themselves over to you itself, and the way that you throw those hay balls back is basically with the wand itself, and then after that you just keep throwing your hand like crazy with those handballs back to basically your opponent. And Loxy he pretty much basically got doggy eaten to breakfast pretty much himself. He didn't really think that this group of basically ragtag funky nobodies in itself would really be sort of a test to his abilities itself. Oh boy, was he wrong in itself. Now we will work our way up to the rest of the basically sort of holy sanctified canyon sort of like underground settlement here in itself, and the adepts, they continue to be adaptable amateurs in itself. As you just saw, they meet their swift a cactus sort of cactus elimination itself, in terms of like the cactuses there is on basically out in sort of like the sandy places itself is very spiky. It's spiky itself, and the adept there with basically your sheriff here in town doing pretty much the work he's supposed to be doing itself, took easy care of that like amateur a pleb, adept pleb in itself. Like he didn't really have a toe to stand on, so to say. So now that we simply are getting into the more meaty, greedy places of this place here in itself, then things will be a little bit more, strategic. Like there has to be done a lot more kind of like line of sighting itself here, and line of sighting these bunch of basically outlaws, pretty much here for your truly sheriff in town. Itself is not as easy. As it was in the cathedral itself, like wasn't it like five years ago or something like that? Pretty sure it was like 5 years ago. The Century Times here in itself, and the newspapers, they usually tell about yours truly doing all sorts of heroic actions for the funky nobody basically, recruits here that yours truly, sheriff in town, basically, take all sort of like an ordinary escort ride itself that then turns into all sorts of shenanigans. It's all about shenanigans here in the Western dude itself, and these shenanigans is pretty much what makes these Western sort of like settlements the more, let's just say, not as predictable as they might look like for basically the recruits of yours truly here, sheriff in town, that escorts them pretty much to the safety places in these settlements themselves. Here out in the canyon itself, there's also a bunch of elms from time to time, as well as mooses that likes to patrol around. In this case, these elm and mooses are essentially some of the sort of like outlaw simply like gang members in this place here itself, in the settlement itself, that likes to be on the lookout for troublemaker recruit. Like yours truly here is currently, as explained to you, trying to basically get through in one piece. But in these sorts of like dangerous places for recruits itself, they usually get like smacked in the face very fast itself, as you just pretty much saw right there. Itself. It isn't something that is easily unavoidable itself. Someone eventually of recruits here in the Wild West itself will meet their swift their swift doom. Their swift doom itself. It's kind of like sort of trying to tire a wheel a little bit in sort of like a cranky sort of fashion itself, but the wheel doesn't want to work with you itself, no matter how many basically times you try and work and simply work around it itself. It doesn't wanna. It simply doesn't wanna work with you. Like its mechanics is too hard for the average simply like a funky nobody here in the Wild West itself to understand. But anyway, we are pretty much like nearing the last boss now itself. Only a couple of more outlaw gang members here in this settlement itself, being the library here. Lots of books in here itself. pretty much like depicting the events that in the Wild West here itself has happened throughout the years. There was once a time where like Ashanti and like Rob, also itself, she was called Shandirella, tried to go in here and like see if she could kiss simply one of these gang members and outlaws in itself, but they quickly got turned into pretty much, sort of like a little bit of a skeleton, sort of, a tortured prisoner, skeleton tortured prisoner. Like the game members here doesn't basically take no for granted to like doing their bidding itself. And if you don't do their bidding, they would pretty much like torture you, and a cult like Jesus Christ would be tortured back in the ancient kind of like civilization times, kind of like civilization, but with a little bit more oomph in the civilization. Anyway, last boss here itself, he does a one-shot simply ability that you just need to go away for as fast as possible. After that, unless you're basically a 60 sheriff here in town itself, and that's pretty much what he does for this dungeon and some other things. And that's about it for this place. Gang laws are not to be trusted ever. Subscribe, you less. Hit the likey cow button below and share this video. Push the horse notification bell for more mooing Azeroth mortals boosting adventure shenanigans. And until next time.
Adios.